Good morning. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. There are some pictures that are worth even more than 1,000 words, as the old adage goes. Almost 54 years ago this week, the first ever team of American astronauts was assembled, and soon after, this picture was taken of the Mercury 7, all suited up and ready to blast off. Photographed by the company that manufactured those spacesuits, these future perfect-looking 7 helped the nascent NASA to capture the hearts and minds of the country. Not to mention their tax dollars, because American space exploration needed a good PR day. Before the United States could even get NASA off the ground, we were rocked by the Soviet launch of Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth. And in the midst of the Cold War, President Kennedy was mired in the Bay of Pigs fiasco when the Soviet Union followed up with the first successful human space flight in April 1961. With no intention of being outdone or outgunned, Kennedy fired back with a big, bold initiative, the moon.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
Expensive indeed. That first call for a man on the moon, which launched that giant leap forward for mankind, ended up costing an estimated $170 billion of the contemporary American kind. Not to mention countless hours of manpower, political energy, and public attention. Public attention that was looking up into the stars along with President Kennedy, while young men and women of this brave new world were getting on buses to test the desegregation in the Jim Crow South. Those first freedom riders met by violent mobs inspired the courage of 1,000 who joined their efforts that summer. But the Apollo mission was politically more about nationalism than space travel. Kennedy had made that clear up front.
In a very real sense, it will not be one man going to the moon. If we make this judgment affirmatively, it will be an entire nation. For all of us must work to put him there.
On July 20th, 1969, just before the end of the decade, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first people to walk on the moon. And that image has carried through the decades as a symbol seemingly of what America is capable of doing. That sentiment was echoed once again this week by President Obama when he announced the next great American project to unlock the secrets of the human brain.
We have a chance to improve the lives of not just millions, but billions of people on this planet through the research that's done in this BRAIN initiative alone. But it's going to require a serious effort, a sustained effort. And it's going to require us as a country to embody and embrace that spirit of discovery that is what made America America.
What President Obama proposed this week, the BRAIN Research through Advancing Initiatives Neurotechnologies, or BRAIN Initiative, was to provide direct funding to accelerate the invention of new tools to help neurologists visualize the complex neural circuitry of the brain and follow the interaction of cells that happen, as they say, at the speed of thought. The Obama administration, along with the NIH, the National Science Foundation, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, hope that this funding will lead to new treatments and even cures to brain disorders like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, and traumatic brain injury. And all of that with the seed money of $100 million. Yeah, $100 million for this next great American project. Take that, China and EU. But, actually, European scientists are already at their lab benches with $1.5 billion in funding for their human brain project backed by the European Commission and 80 international research institutions. And after China's BrainTome initiative has been pumping out research since 2004, it seems like maybe we are getting Sputniked all over again. NIH funding has been flatlining for the first time since anyone can remember. And the impact of American scientific papers has fallen behind Great Britain and Germany. And if these sequester cuts hold, NIH is looking at a devastating $1.6 billion cut for the remainder of the fiscal year. In fact, letters have already gone out to researchers with ongoing grants that they should start scaling back. So when we consider the state of our economy and budget battle still to come, is President Obama's BRAIN initiative just a small step for this one man, or a giant leap forward for us all? At the table this morning, Sam Wong, Associate Professor at Princeton's Neuroscience Institute, and Partha Mitra, Professor of Biomathematics at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York. Laura Flanders, host and founder of GritTV.org, and Dr. Jonathan Metzl, Professor of Psychiatry at Vanderbilt University and author of Protest Psychosis. It is so nice to have you all here. Okay, Sam, I want to start with you. How big is this? Is this as big as space, this idea of going into the brain?
Well, I think there's no denying that one of the great scientific frontiers remaining is understanding the brain. And so far, researchers have been working quite hard for the last decades, working at different levels, single cells, the entire brain. We hear about brain scan technologies. And this seems like a really good time to develop technologies to start filling in levels, joining those levels with each other. And this initiative is an excellent proposal led by very good scientists to start filling in those gaps, to develop technologies to let us watch the brain in action. It's a great time.
So what are the deliverables, right? I mean, I know when Kennedy is asking us about space, he's saying we're going to go to the moon. What are the deliverables on the brain? What will learning about this teach us?
Well, I think that's a great question. The deliverables so far that have been proposed are really technologies to monitor, in this case, the activity of the brain. I think the moon analogy, you really knew when Neil Armstrong actually set his foot on the moon.
Right.
So you kind of knew, okay, that's success. So one of the difficult things about the brain is it's a very complicated thing to understand. People have been struggling for centuries, millennia. And how will we know that we have succeeded, right? So what is the deliverable is a good question. And I think there's going to be planning. There's a committee that will think this through for the next year or some fraction of the year and really decide what the deliverables are and when we will know we will have succeeded.
But it's certainly not like this is the first moment, right?
Yeah, people have been working on this for years, and I think this is a time when there have been some excellent technologies coming on for manipulating tissue with light, for observing what a circuit does in real time. There's been a lot going on under the radar, and I think one thing that is missed in this week's announcement is that people have been at work for quite a while. And if you look at the technical journals, if you look at the science magazines, there's been a lot happening, and it feels like there's some kind of turning point where at least our ability to start asking questions with more precision is about to improve dramatically.
Now, Jonathan, for me, part of the reason I wanted to start with the space versus civil rights paradigm, right? At some point, my team is going to make me have the space people on because I have a lot of angst about right. I have a lot of angst. Yeah, you can come talk about space too. I have a lot of angst about it because it feels to me like, look, there really are resource constraints in the world, and so when we put money towards one thing and we put attention towards one thing, we will often miss the other. So the same time that we're space racing, we're in the middle of the civil rights movement. Here we are in the context of sequester, and yet going into the brain. Is that a good? Is that a sign of us, going to our frontier despite our economic resources, or is that a maybe we need to not go to the brain? We got to put food on the table.
Well, I'll say two things about that. And one is just to mirror that I think that this is a very exciting development, and we should be thinking big. I mean, this is what our country does, and it's a tremendous opportunity to jumpstart something at a time. I mean, in a way, it is encouraging that this is happening at a time of sequester to say, no, our research is not going to stop. The caveat for me, actually, is that the brain doesn't exist I mean, the pictures are nice. It looks like the brain is just this totally isolated thing. But a lot of times what we find out from brain research is something that's linked to the social environment. So we had the Human Genome Project, for example. We learned from epigenetics that people who live in resource-poor environments have poor brain development. So in a way, a lot of times the brain issues point back to social infrastructure issues. And so it can't just be money toward the brain. We also have to invest in the infrastructure that leads to brain disease.
Well, which of course, for me on the NSF piece, right, I mean, on the one hand, I just saw NSF, through the Colburn Amendment, take all of the money from NSF for political science funding. At the same time that we're now talking about NSF and NIH going in on the brain. And I think, I love STEM. I'm down for this kind of science. But I also wonder about our ability to see it in a more holistic way.
I think it's very confusing. I think what Jonathan just said is really important, that you can datafy all you want, you can map all you want, but actually nurturing the next Einstein is going to take more than just some really good GPS of the brain device. But I think in terms of the public perception, it's super confusing. How can the sequester have just taken, as Sam said, $10 billion from American science, and then suddenly there's this $100 million, or maybe it's $3 billion down the road money for mapping the brain? I hate to be the cynic here, but what I see is that picture that you just showed of the good astronauts in the picture by the folks that made the suit. A picture like that today, the suits would be made by Eli Lilly, Johnson & Johnson, Big Pharma. And what I'm looking at is the next big frontier in enormous profits for pharmaceutical companies is Alzheimer medications. It's the one thing they're failing at. U.S. companies have not succeeded. Johnson & Johnson, a big failure recently. Eli Lilly, not doing much better. So I can't help but say that see this as a little bit of a kind of gift to Big Pharma. It may be being done well, but I think it's about generating jobs and money, and that is what Obama talked about in the first part.
And we're going to stay on exactly that topic as soon as we get back. I want to talk about Alzheimer's. I want to talk about what we already know, and maybe Sam will take the brain apart and show us a little bit about how it works, because I think there is something to be said about this shift in our research priorities at this moment. In part, when we say Alzheimer's, remember what our policy always does is track those boomers. There's a lot of them, and now they're aging when we come back.